The stranger's boots hit the dirt of Commerce Street just as the woman ahead of him reached into her worn leather purse and pulled out what had to be her last coin, pressing it into the trembling palm of a one-legged beggar slumped against the mercantile wall. Thomas Vance stopped dead in his tracks, the September 1878 sun beating down on his shoulders as he watched her smile at the grateful old man, her face lighting up with genuine warmth, despite the obvious poverty written in every threadbare inch of her faded blue dress. Something stirred in his chest, something he had not felt in all his 32 years of drifting from town to town, ranch to ranch, never finding a place or a person that made him want to stay. She turned away from the beggar, and Thomas caught a glimpse of her profile, the determined set of her jaw even as her stomach must have been crying out for the meal that coin could have bought. Her dark blonde hair was pulled back in a simple bun, wisps escaping in the heat, and her hands, he noticed, were work-roughened and honest. She could not have been more than 23 or 24, but there was a weariness around her eyes that spoke of hardship faced with grace. Thomas had been heading toward the saloon, planning to spend the wages from his last cattle drive on whiskey and cards, but now he found his feet carrying him in her direction. She was walking with purpose, despite her obvious exhaustion, heading toward the boarding house at the end of the street. He followed at a respectful distance, curious about this woman who gave away her last cent. Dallas was bustling that afternoon, wagons rolling past kicking up dust, merchants calling out their wares, and the sound of a piano tinkling from inside the Lucky Star saloon. Thomas barely noticed any of it. His attention was fixed on the woman ahead, the way she held her head high even though her boots were splitting at the seams. She climbed the steps to Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, and Thomas watched as she exchanged words with the stern-faced proprietor on the porch. Even from across the street, he could see the conversation was not going well. The older woman's expression was hard, her arms crossed over her ample bosom. The young woman's shoulders sagged, and she nodded slowly before turning away. Thomas crossed the street in long strides, reaching the boarding house just as the young woman descended the steps. She nearly collided with him, and he reached out to steady her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Pardon me, miss," he said, his voice rough from years of shouting over cattle and wind. She looked up at him, and he saw her eyes were a startling green, the color of new grass after spring rain. "No, forgive me, sir. I was not watching where I was going." Up close, he could see the fine lines of strain around her mouth, the way her lips pressed together as if holding back words or tears. She smelled faintly of lavender soap, and there was a dignity about her that poverty could not erase. "Are you in some kind of trouble?" The words came out before he could stop them, too forward for a stranger, but something about her pulled honesty from him. Her cheeks flushed pink. "I am afraid that is not your concern, though I appreciate your kindness in asking." "You just gave your last coin to that beggar," Thomas said quietly. "I saw you." Her flush deepened, but her chin came up. "Then you saw an old man who needed it more than I did. You need it plenty from the looks of things." He softened his tone. "I am not trying to offend you, miss. I am just trying to understand what kind of woman gives away her last cent when she clearly needs it herself." She studied him for a long moment, those green eyes searching his face as if trying to determine whether he was genuine or merely another man looking to take advantage. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, because some of the tension left her shoulders. "The kind who believes there is always a way forward if you have faith and determination," she said simply. "Now, if you will excuse me, I need to find work before nightfall." "What kind of work are you looking for?" She hesitated, then sighed. "Any kind. I can cook, clean, so keep accounts. I can read and write and do figures. I worked as a schoolteacher back in Virginia before my father passed and I came west to join my brother. Only when I arrived in Dallas last week, I discovered he had moved on to California 3 months prior without leaving word. The story came out in a rush, as if she had been holding it in and his question had opened a dam. Thomas felt that stirring in his chest again, stronger this time. So you have been here a week with no money and no prospects. I had a little money, she said defensively. I have been staying at the boarding house, but Mrs. Henderson just informed me that unless I can pay for another week by tomorrow morning, she will have to rent my room to someone else. I have been looking for work, but there are not many positions available for a woman alone in this town. Thomas made a decision that surprised him even as the words left his mouth. The Silver Spur Ranch, about an hour's ride northwest of here, is looking for someone to manage the household. The owner, Charles Whitfield, is an old friend of mine. His wife died 2 years ago and he has 3 young children who need looking after. The house has fallen into disarray, and he has been desperate to find someone capable and trustworthy. Her eyes widened. Truly. You are not just saying this to be kind. I do not lie, miss. It is not in my nature. He paused. I can take you out there first thing tomorrow morning if you are interested. I worked that ranch for 5 years before I started drifting. Charles will listen to my recommendation. Why would you do this for me? You do not even know my name. No, I do not. But I know you gave your last coin to a beggar, and that tells me more about your character than 100 letters of reference. He extended his hand. Thomas Vance. She took his hand, her grip firm despite the delicacy of her fingers. Fiona Rosewood, and I accept your offer, Mr. Vance, with gratitude. Thomas, he said, just Thomas. Then you must call me Fiona. She smiled, and it transformed her face, chasing away the worry lines and revealing the beauty beneath the exhaustion. Where shall I meet you tomorrow? Right here at dawn. Bring whatever belongings you have. If Charles hires you, and I am certain he will, you will be living at the ranch. I do not have much, she admitted. Just a trunk with some clothes and a few books. I will bring a wagon then. He tipped his hat to her. Until tomorrow, Fiona. Until tomorrow, Thomas. He watched her walk away, her step lighter than before, and realized with a jolt that he had just committed himself to returning to the Silver Spur, a place he had fled when memories of his own lost family had become too painful to bear. But if it meant helping this woman, this Fiona with her generous heart and determined spirit, then perhaps it was time to face those ghosts. Thomas found a room at a different boarding house, one less expensive than Mrs. Henderson's establishment, and lay awake most of the night thinking about green eyes and selfless gestures. He had seen a lot in his years drifting through Texas, had met women of every description from dance hall girls to refined ladies, but none had ever affected him the way Fiona Rosewood had in those few minutes of conversation. Dawn came slow and golden, painting the Dallas sky in shades of rose and amber. Thomas hitched up a wagon he borrowed from the livery, promising the owner he would return it by evening, and made his way to Mrs. Henderson's boarding house. Fiona was already waiting on the porch, standing beside a battered trunk that had clearly seen better days. She wore the same blue dress from yesterday, but she had mended a tear in the sleeve and pressed it as best she could. Her hair was neatly pinned, and despite the early hour, she looked alert and ready. "Good morning," she called out, her voice cheerful. "I confess I half feared you might have changed your mind in the night." "I am a man of my word," Thomas said, climbing down to help her with the trunk. It was heavier than he expected, and when he raised an eyebrow, she laughed. "Books," she explained. "I could not bear to leave them behind when I left Virginia. They belonged to my mother, and they are some of the few things I have left of her." He loaded the trunk carefully into the wagon bed, then offered his hand to help her up onto the seat. She settled beside him, arranging her skirts, and he caught another whiff of that lavender soap. The ride out of Dallas took them through streets just coming to life, shopkeepers opening their doors, the smell of fresh bread drifting from the bakery. Once they left the town limits, the landscape opened up into rolling prairie dotted with mesquite and oak. The September morning was pleasant, not yet baked into the fierce heat that would come by midday. "Tell me about Mr. Whitfield," Fiona said as they rode. "What sort of man is he?" "Fair and honest," Thomas replied, keeping his eyes on the road. "He came to Texas from Missouri 15 years ago, built the Silver Spur from nothing. He is a hard worker and expects the same from those who work for him, but he is not cruel or unreasonable. His wife, Sarah, was a good woman. Her death hit him hard, and he has been struggling to manage the ranch and care for the children on his own." "How old are the children? Let me think. Samuel must be about 8 now, Margaret is 6, and little Emily is 4. They are good kids, though Samuel has become a bit wild without a woman's influence. He needs a firm but gentle hand." "And you think I could provide that?" Thomas glanced at her, taking in the doubt that flickered across her face. "I think you are the kind of woman who gives her last coin to a stranger in need. That tells me you have compassion and strength in equal measure. Those children need someone who will care for them, not just someone who will cook and clean." "You have a great deal of faith in me based on very little evidence," she said softly. "Sometimes you just know," Thomas said, and realized he was not just talking about her suitability for the position. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the clip-clop of the horses' hooves and the creak of the wagon wheels. The sun climbed higher, warming the air, and Thomas found himself hyper-aware of Fiona beside him, the way she sat with perfect posture despite the rough ride, the way she watched the landscape with interest rather than the bored indifference he had seen in so many people who had lived in Texas all their lives. "What made you leave Virginia?" he asked eventually. "My father was a minister," she said, her voice taking on a distant quality. "A good man who believed in helping others. We never had much money, but we had a comfortable life, a community that respected us. Then he contracted pneumonia last winter and died within a week. The church provided a new minister, and the house we had lived in belonged to the church. I had nowhere to go except to my brother, Peter. He had come west 3 years ago to seek his fortune and had written glowing letters about Texas. So I sold what little I could, bought passage on the train, and came to Dallas, and found he had already left. Yes." She turned to look at him. "But perhaps it was meant to be. Perhaps I was supposed to come here and meet you on that street yesterday. Perhaps this position at the Silver Spur is where I am supposed to be. You believe in fate. I believe that God has a plan, even when we cannot see it clearly." She smiled. "And I believe that kindness is never wasted, even when it seems to leave us with nothing." Thomas thought about that, about the way she had given her last coin without hesitation, without calculation. He had spent so many years guarding his heart, keeping people at a distance, because loss had taught him that caring too much only brought pain. But here was this woman who had lost everything and still believed in goodness, still gave freely even when she had nothing left to give. The Silver Spur Ranch came into view as they crested a low hill. Its buildings spread out across a valley, watered by a clear running creek. The main house was substantial, built of wood with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. The barn and outbuildings were well maintained, and Thomas could see cattle grazing in the distance, their coats gleaming in the sunlight. "It is beautiful," Fiona breathed, leaning forward slightly. "Charles has worked hard to build this place," Thomas said, feeling a surge of old pride. He had helped build some of those outbuildings, had spent long days mending fences and breaking horses. The silver spur held as many good memories as painful ones. As they drove up to the main house, the front door opened and Charles Whitfield stepped out onto the porch. He was a tall man in his early 40s, with graying hair and the weathered face of someone who spent most of his time outdoors. His expression shifted from curious to astonished when he recognized Thomas. "Thomas Vance," Charles called out, striding down the steps. "I never thought I would see you darken my doorstep again. What brings you back after 3 years?" Thomas climbed down from the wagon and clasped Charles's offered hand. "Good to see you too, Charles. I have brought someone who might be the answer to your prayers." He turned to help Fiona down, and she stood before Charles with her head high despite her worn dress and obvious nervousness. "Charles Whitfield, this is Miss Fiona Rosewood. She is a school teacher from Virginia, newly arrived in Dallas and looking for a position. I thought she might be well suited to managing your household and caring for your children." Charles studied Fiona with shrewd eyes, taking in every detail. "Is that so? What makes you think you are qualified for such a position, Miss Rosewood?" "I managed my father's household for 6 years after my mother passed," Fiona said, her voice steady and clear. "I can cook, clean, sew, and mend. I taught school for 3 years, so I am patient with children and can help with their education. I keep accounts accurately, and am not afraid of hard work. Most importantly, Mr. Whitfield, I understand that children need more than just someone to see to their physical needs. They need someone who will care about their hearts and minds as well." A slight smile tugged at Charles's mouth. "Those are fine words, Miss Rosewood, but I need more than words. I need someone reliable, someone who will not run off at the first difficulty. This is a working ranch, not a Dallas parlor. Life out here can be hard and lonely. I gave away my last coin yesterday to a man who needed it more than I did," Fiona said simply. "I spent my last night in my boarding house room not knowing where I would sleep tonight. I came to Texas expecting to find my brother and found he had abandoned me without a word. I know about difficulty and loneliness, Mr. Whitfield. But I also know how to endure, how to find joy in small things, and how to make a house a home even when circumstances are challenging." Charles looked at Thomas, one eyebrow raised. "You vouch for her?" "I do," Thomas said without hesitation. "I saw her give that coin to the beggar. I saw the way she carried herself even though she had nothing. She has heart, Charles, and that is what your children need most." "Well then." Charles turned back to Fiona. "The position pays $30 a month plus room and board. You will have your own room off the kitchen. You will be responsible for cooking 3 meals a day, keeping the house clean, doing the washing and mending, and caring for my 3 children. Sundays are your own after breakfast is cleared away. Does that sound acceptable?" "More than acceptable, Mr. Whitfield. It sounds like a blessing." "Then let us go inside and I will introduce you to the children. Thomas, you will stay for dinner, if it is not an imposition. You brought me a potential savior. The least I can do is feed you." Charles led the way into the house, calling out for the children. The interior of the house showed the truth of Charles's claims. The front room was spacious but cluttered, with children's toys scattered across the floor and dust coating every surface. Dishes were piled in the kitchen, and the curtains hung crooked on their rods. But the bones of the house were good, with solid furniture and large windows that let in plenty of light. 3 children came tumbling down the stairs at their father's call. Samuel was a gangly boy of 8 with his father's dark hair and a wary expression. Margaret was a pretty child with brown curls and a thumb in her mouth, though she was certainly too old for such a habit. Little Emily clung to her brother's hand, her blue eyes enormous in her small face. "Children, this is Miss Rosewood." She may be coming to live with us and take care of the house and you three rascals. What do you say to that?" Samuel's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "We do not need taking care of. We do fine on our own." "Samuel," Charles said warningly. "It is all right," Fiona said quickly, crouching down so she was at eye level with the children. "You know, Samuel, I think you are probably right. You look like a very capable young man, but even capable people need help sometimes. I am sure you help your father with the ranch work, do you not?" "Yes, madam," Samuel said grudgingly. "Well, I am very good at cooking and cleaning and such, but I do not know much about ranching. So perhaps we could help each other. You and Margaret and Emily could teach me about life on a ranch, and I could make sure there are hot meals and clean clothes." "What do you think?" Samuel considered this, his young face serious. "Can you make apple pie?" "I can indeed, and my biscuits have been known to be quite good as well." "Do you tell stories?" This from Margaret around her thumb. "I love stories." "I brought a whole trunk full of books with me, and I know many stories by heart. Will you be nice?" Emily asked in a whisper. Fiona's expression softened. "I will be very nice, sweetheart, I promise." Emily studied her for another moment, then nodded and smiled. Samuel shrugged, which seemed to be as close to approval as he was willing to give. Margaret just stared at Fiona with something like hope in her eyes. "Well then," Charles said, looking pleased. "It seems the children are willing to give you a chance, Miss Rosewood. The position is yours if you want it." "I do want it, Mr. Whitfield. Thank you. Call me Charles, please. We do not stand on ceremony out here. Now, why do not you let me show you to your room and you can get settled? Children, go wash up for dinner." Thomas helped carry Fiona's trunk inside and down a short hallway off the kitchen to a small but comfortable room with a bed, a dresser, and a window overlooking the back garden. It was simple but clean, and Fiona looked at it as if it were a palace. "Thank you," she said to Thomas as he set the trunk down, "for everything. I do not know how I can ever repay your kindness." "No repayment needed," he said gruffly, suddenly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "You just take care of those children." "I will." She looked up at him, and there was something in her eyes that made his heart beat faster. "Will I see you again?" "I expect so. I told Charles I would help out around the ranch for a few weeks. He is short-handed with the fall roundup coming." That was a lie. Charles had not asked for his help, and Thomas had no obligation to stay. But the words had come out anyway, because the thought of riding back to Dallas and never seeing Fiona again was suddenly unbearable. "I am glad," Fiona said softly. "I would like that very much." The dinner that followed was chaotic, but pleasant. Fiona made herself useful in the kitchen, taking stock of the supplies and beginning to organize the chaos. She prepared a simple meal of fried chicken, potatoes, and greens, working with an efficiency that spoke of long practice. The children watched her with varying degrees of suspicion and curiosity, but by the time the food was on the table, even Samuel was looking at her with grudging respect. Thomas found himself watching Fiona throughout the meal. The way she gently corrected Emily's table manners without making the child feel bad. The way she drew Margaret out with questions about her favorite things. The way she treated Samuel with the respect he craved as the oldest. She had a natural way with the children, warm but not cloying, and Thomas could see Charles relaxing as the meal progressed. "This is the best meal we have had in months," Charles said, pushing back from the table with a satisfied sigh. "Miss Rosewood, I think you are going to work out just fine. Please call me Fiona, and I am glad you enjoyed it. Run along now, children. Samuel, make sure your sisters brush their teeth." After the children had trooped upstairs, Charles poured coffee for himself and Thomas while Fiona began clearing the dishes. "You can leave that until morning," Charles told her. "You must be exhausted from the journey." "I do not mind," Fiona said. I would rather wake up to a clean kitchen." "Stubborn," Charles observed with approval. "Good, you will need to be to manage this household." He turned to Thomas. "So you said something about helping out for a few weeks." Thomas felt his face warm. "If you could use an extra hand." "I could always use an extra hand, especially yours. You know this ranch as well as I do." Charles's eyes were knowing. "Though I suspect it is not just the ranch drawing you back." "I do not know what you mean," Thomas said, too quickly. "Right." Charles grinned. "Well, whatever your reasons, I am grateful to have you. You can take your old bunk in the bunkhouse." Thomas stayed for another hour, ostensibly to discuss the work that needed doing, but truthfully because he was not ready to leave Fiona yet. She moved around the kitchen with quiet competence, washing dishes and wiping down surfaces, transforming the chaotic space into something orderly and clean. He found himself noticing small things about her: the way she hummed softly as she worked, the way she pushed back that escaped strand of hair with the back of her wrist, the way she smiled when she caught him watching her. Finally, there were no more excuses to linger. Thomas said his goodnights and headed out to the bunkhouse, where 3 other ranch hands were already settling in for the night. They greeted him with surprise and pleasure, old friends who had worked alongside him years ago, and he fell into easy conversation with them. But even as he talked and laughed, part of his mind remained in that kitchen, with a woman who gave her last coin to a stranger. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Thomas rose before dawn with the other hands, spending his days mending fences, checking cattle, and helping prepare for the roundup. It was hard physical work that left him exhausted by evening, but it was good to be useful again, good to be part of something larger than himself. And every evening, he would find a reason to come up to the main house. Sometimes it was to discuss ranch business with Charles. Sometimes it was to fix something that needed fixing, a loose step or a sticking door. And sometimes he would just appear at the kitchen door around supper time, and Fiona would smile at him and set an extra place at the table without comment. He watched as she transformed the Whitfield household. Within a week, the house was spotless, curtains washed and hung straight, floors scrubbed and clutter organized. The children, who had been half wild, began to settle under her gentle but firm guidance. She established routines, bedtimes, and expectations, but she also made time for play and laughter. She read to them every evening after supper, her voice bringing to life the stories from the books in her trunk, and Thomas found himself lingering in the doorway to listen. Samuel was the hardest to win over, as Thomas had expected. The boy had built walls around his heart after his mother's death, and he tested Fiona constantly, pushing boundaries and defying instructions. But Fiona never lost her temper. She was patient and consistent, praising good behavior and calmly correcting bad, and slowly, grudgingly, Samuel began to soften. It was 2 weeks after Fiona's arrival that Thomas saw the breakthrough. He had come up to the house to deliver some supplies from town and found Samuel in the kitchen with Fiona, helping her knead bread dough. The boy's hands were covered in flour, and he was laughing at something Fiona had said, his face open and happy in a way Thomas had not seen since Sarah's death. "You are good for them," Thomas said later, after the children were in bed and he and Fiona sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of purple and gold. "They are good for me," Fiona replied. "I have missed teaching, missed being around children. They fill a hole I did not realize was quite so large." "Is teaching all you miss?" The question was bold, more personal than he had allowed himself to be, but the sunset and the quiet and the feeling of contentment had loosened his tongue. Fiona was silent for a moment. "I miss my father terribly. I miss having a family, people who belong to me and to whom I belong. I suppose that is why I was so desperate to find my brother. He was all the family I had left. Have you heard from him at all? No. I sent a letter to the last address I had for him in California, but I have no idea if it will reach him. She turned to look at Thomas. What about you? Do you have family? Not anymore. The words came out more harshly than he intended. I had a wife once and a daughter. They died of cholera 8 years ago. Oh, Thomas. Her hand covered his where it rested on the porch rail. I am so sorry. Her touch was warm and comforting, and he found himself turning his hand over to clasp hers. It was a long time ago. I thought I had dealt with it, but being here, seeing Charles with his children, watching them struggle without a mother, it brought it all back. That is why I left the Silver Spur 3 years ago. I could not bear the reminder. Then why did you come back? He looked at her green eyes soft with compassion in the fading light. Because I saw you give your last coin to a beggar, and I knew I had to help you. And once I helped you, I could not seem to make myself leave. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with something unspoken but powerful. Fiona's cheeks flushed pink, and she looked away, but she did not remove her hand from his. I am glad you stayed, she said quietly. These past 2 weeks have been the happiest I have been since my father died. I have work I am good at, children to care for, and a friend I have come to value greatly. Is that what I am, a friend? Are you not? I want to be more. The words were out before he could stop them, reckless and honest. I want to court you properly, Fiona. I want to take you on picnics and bring you flowers and see if this thing between us is as real as it feels. She turned back to him, her eyes searching his face. You barely know me. I know you have the biggest heart of anyone I have ever met. I know you are kind and patient and strong. I know that when I am near you, I feel more alive than I have in 8 years. That is enough for me. The question is it enough for you? Fiona bit her lip, and for a terrifying moment Thomas thought she would refuse. Then she smiled, slow and sweet. Yes, Thomas Vance, you may court me. The joy that flooded through him was almost painful in its intensity. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. Thank you. They sat together as the stars began to appear, hands clasped, and Thomas felt something he thought he would never feel again. Hope. The courtship that followed was conducted under the watchful eyes of Charles and the children, propriety maintained but affection growing with each passing day. Thomas found excuses to be near Fiona constantly. He would come to the kitchen for a cup of coffee and stay to help her knead bread. He would offer to carry water from the well and linger to talk. On Sundays, after Fiona's work was done, he would hitch up a wagon and take her on drives around the countryside, showing her the beauty of the Texas prairie. They talked about everything. Fiona told him about growing up in Virginia, about her mother's death when she was 17, and how she had stepped into the role of minister's wife, supporting her father and caring for the congregation. Thomas told her about his own childhood in Tennessee, about learning the cattle business and coming to Texas full of dreams. He even told her about his wife, Mary, and their daughter, little Sarah, memories he had locked away for so long that speaking them aloud was like lancing an old wound. Do you still love her? Fiona asked one Sunday as they sat by the creek, the water burbling peacefully beside them. I will always love her, Thomas said honestly. She was my first love and she gave me the greatest gift of my daughter, but she is gone and I have spent 8 years mourning. I think it is time I learned to live again. I am not trying to replace her, Fiona said softly. I could never do that. I do not want you to replace her. I want you to be yourself, Fiona Rosewood, the woman with the generous heart and the kind words. I want to build something new with you, not try to recreate what was lost. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat like that for a long time, watching the water and the clouds and simply being together. The children noticed the growing attachment between Thomas and Fiona, and their reactions were mixed. Emily was delighted, declaring that Fiona should marry Thomas, and then they could all be a family. Margaret watched with wide, hopeful eyes but said nothing. Samuel was the most resistant. His jealousy of Thomas's claim on Fiona's attention manifesting in sullen silences and occasional rudeness. Fiona handled it with her usual grace, making sure to give each child individual attention and never allowing her time with Thomas to interfere with her responsibilities. And gradually, even Samuel began to come around, especially after the incident with the horse. It happened on a bright October morning. Samuel had been forbidden to ride the new stallion Charles had purchased, a spirited animal that was not yet fully broken. But 8-year-old pride and stubbornness led Samuel to disobey, and he was in the corral trying to mount the horse when Thomas came around the corner of the barn. The stallion reared, its hooves flashing dangerously close to Samuel's head, and Thomas did not think. He vaulted the fence and grabbed the boy, pulling him out of harm's way just as the horse's hooves came down where Samuel had been standing. The stallion whinnied and bucked, but Thomas held Samuel tight, his heart pounding with fear and relief. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, setting Samuel down and running his hands over the boy's arms and legs, checking for injuries. "I am fine," Samuel said, his voice shaking. "I just wanted to ride him. I thought I could do it. You could have been killed." Thomas gripped Samuel's shoulders, his own hands trembling. "Do you understand that? Another second and that horse would have crushed your skull." "I am sorry," Samuel whispered, and suddenly he was crying, not the defiant boy trying to prove himself but a scared child who had just faced his mortality. "I am sorry, I am sorry." Thomas pulled him close, holding him as he sobbed. "It is all right. You are safe now, but you have to promise me you will never do something so foolish again. Your father needs you. Your sisters need you, and Fiona would be heartbroken if anything happened to you. Would you be heartbroken?" Samuel asked, his voice muffled against Thomas's shirt. "Yes," Thomas said simply. "I would." After that, Samuel's attitude toward Thomas changed. He sought him out, asking questions about horses and cattle and ranch work. He began to treat Thomas with the respect and affection a boy shows his father. And Thomas found himself stepping naturally into that role, teaching and guiding and caring for this boy who was not his by blood, but who was working his way into his heart. As autumn deepened and the leaves turned gold and red, Thomas knew he wanted to marry Fiona. He was more certain of it than he had been of anything in his life. But he wanted to do it right, to ask her properly with a ring and a heartfelt proposal. The problem was he had very little money. Years of drifting had left him with savings barely enough for a train ticket, let alone a proper ring. But he had something else, something precious he had carried with him all these years. He retrieved the small velvet box from his pack in the bunkhouse and opened it, looking at the gold band inside. It had been his grandmother's ring, passed down to him to give to Mary. She had worn it for the 5 years of their marriage, and after her death he had kept it, unable to part with it but unable to look at it either. Now he took it out and examined it in the lamplight. It was simple but beautiful, a gold band with a small diamond set in the center. Mary would have wanted him to be happy, he thought. She would have wanted him to love again, and he could not think of a better way to honor her memory than to offer this ring to Fiona, a woman who embodied the same kindness and strength that Mary had possessed. He chose a Sunday evening in late October when the air was crisp and the sky was full of stars. He asked Fiona to walk with him after supper, and she agreed, pulling a shawl around her shoulders against the chill. They walked away from the house toward the creek, the sound of the water a gentle backdrop to their footsteps. "Fiona," Thomas began, his heart hammering so hard he was sure she could hear it. "These past 2 months have been the best of my life. You have brought light into darkness, hope where there was despair. You have made me believe in happiness again." "Thomas," she said softly, her eyes shining in the starlight, "I know I am not a wealthy man. I am just a cowboy with not much to offer except a strong back and a willing heart. But I love you, Fiona. I love your kindness and your courage and your generous spirit. I love the way you care for those children as if they were your own. I love the way you make me want to be a better man." He pulled out the ring box and opened it, sinking to one knee on the grass. "Will you marry me? Will you be my wife and let me spend the rest of my life trying to make you as happy as you have made me?" Fiona's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Oh, Thomas. Yes, yes, of course I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and she pulled him to his feet, throwing her arms around his neck. He held her close, breathing in the scent of lavender and feeling the warmth of her body against his. When she tilted her face up, he kissed her for the first time, a kiss full of promise and tenderness and all the love he had been holding back. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I think I have loved you since that first day when you followed me and offered to help a stranger. Then I guess giving away your last coin was the best decision you ever made." She laughed, the sound pure joy, and kissed him again. They walked back to the house hand in hand, and when they told Charles and the children the news, there was a celebration. Charles opened a bottle of wine he had been saving. The children cheered and danced around the kitchen, and even the ranch hands came up to offer their congratulations. Emily insisted on sitting on Fiona's lap, touching the ring with wonder, while Margaret declared that Fiona would be the most beautiful bride in all of Texas. Samuel shook Thomas's hand with solemn formality, then ruined the effect by grinning widely and saying, "Does this mean you are going to be my pa?" "If you will have me," Thomas said, his throat tight with emotion. "I will have you," Samuel said and hugged him fiercely. They planned a simple wedding for early December, to be held at the small church in Dallas. Fiona insisted she did not need a fancy dress or an elaborate celebration. She wanted only Thomas, their friends and family, and the blessing of God on their union. The weeks leading up to the wedding were busy. Fiona continued her work at the Silver Spur while also preparing for her new life as Thomas's wife. Charles had given them a parcel of land on the edge of the ranch property as a wedding gift, and Thomas spent every spare moment building them a cabin. It was small but sturdy, with 2 rooms and a loft, a porch facing east to catch the morning sun, and a solid stone chimney. The ranch hands helped with the heavy work, and even the children contributed, carrying water and tools and chattering excitedly about how Thomas and Fiona would live there. Fiona sewed a new dress for the wedding, a simple but lovely creation in cream-colored wool that brought out the green of her eyes. She made matching dresses for Margaret and Emily, who would be her attendants, and a new shirt for Samuel, who would stand up with Thomas. The night before the wedding, Fiona and Thomas sat on the porch of the main house, watching the stars and talking quietly. Charles had taken the children into town to stay with his sister for the night, giving them privacy for their last evening as an unmarried couple. "Are you nervous?" Thomas asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Not nervous," Fiona said thoughtfully. "Excited, grateful, a little amazed that this is real and not just a dream. If it is a dream, I hope I never wake up." She turned to look at him, her face serious in the moonlight. "Thomas, I want you to know something. I know this ring belonged to your first wife. I know she will always hold a special place in your heart, and I do not resent that. I honor it. She was part of making you the man you are, and I am grateful to her for that." Thomas felt his eyes sting with tears. "You are an extraordinary woman, Fiona Rosewood. Soon to be Fiona Vance," she corrected with a smile. Soon to be my wife, he agreed and kissed her tenderly. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, the December sky a brilliant blue. Thomas dressed in his best clothes, his hands shaking slightly as he fastened his collar. He had been married before, but this felt different, new and precious in a way that made his heart race. The small church in Dallas was packed with well-wishers. Charles and his children occupied the front pew, Samuel squirming with barely contained excitement. The ranch hands filled several rows, along with merchants and neighbors who had come to know Fiona during her time in Dallas. Even Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house was there, looking vaguely apologetic for her earlier dismissal of Fiona. When Fiona walked down the aisle on Charles's arm, Thomas felt his breath catch. She was radiant, her face glowing with happiness, her eyes locked on his. The cream dress was perfect, simple and elegant, and she carried a bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers that Margaret had helped her gather that morning. The ceremony was brief but beautiful. The minister, a kindly old man who had known Charles for years, spoke about love and commitment and the blessing of finding a partner to share life's journey. When it came time for the vows, Thomas spoke as clearly and firmly, meaning every word with all his heart. Fiona's voice was softer but no less certain, her eyes never leaving his face. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the minister said with a smile. "Thomas, you may kiss your bride." And Thomas did, a kiss that sealed their promise and began their new life together. The small congregation erupted in applause, and the children rushed forward to hug them both. The reception was held at the Silver Spur, a feast that Fiona had prepared in advance with help from the ranch hands' wives. There was roasted beef and chicken, potatoes and vegetables, fresh bread and pies, and a wedding cake that Emily had helped decorate with sugar flowers. There was music and dancing, laughter and toasts, and through it all, Thomas kept Fiona close, marveling at the fact that she was his wife. As evening fell and the guests began to depart, Thomas and Fiona slipped away to their new cabin. Charles had offered to keep the children for the night, giving the newlyweds privacy. Thomas carried Fiona over the threshold and she laughed, the sound echoing in the empty rooms. "Welcome home, Mrs. Vance," he said, setting her gently on her feet. "Home," she repeated, looking around at the cabin he had built for her. "I like the sound of that." Someone had been there before them. A fire crackled in the hearth, lamps were lit, and their belongings had been moved in and arranged. On the table sat a bottle of wine and 2 glasses, with a note from Charles wishing them happiness. Thomas poured the wine and they toasted each other, their eyes speaking volumes. Then he took her in his arms and kissed her, slow and deep, a kiss that promised a lifetime of love and passion. Fiona responded eagerly, her hands coming up to tangle in his hair, and Thomas felt desire surge through him, strong and sweet. "I love you," he murmured against her lips. "My generous, kind, beautiful wife." "And I love you," she whispered back. "My strong, gentle, wonderful husband." They made love by firelight, tender and passionate, learning each other's bodies with reverence and joy. And afterward, they lay tangled together in their bed, talking softly and planning their future until sleep claimed them. The first months of marriage were blissful. Thomas and Fiona fell into an easy partnership, working together to make their cabin a home. Fiona continued to help at the main house, caring for Charles's children several days a week, while also tending to her own household. Thomas worked the ranch alongside Charles and the other hands, but every evening he came home to Fiona, to her warm smile and welcoming embrace. They grew into their roles as husband and wife, learning each other's habits and preferences, navigating the small conflicts that arise when two people build a life together. Thomas learned that Fiona was not a morning person and needed her coffee before conversation. Fiona learned that Thomas needed time alone after a hard day before he could talk about what was troubling him. They learned to communicate, to compromise, to put each other first. And they were happy, deeply and truly happy in a way that felt almost miraculous to Thomas, who had thought he would never know such contentment again. Spring came to the Texas prairie, painting the land in wildflowers and green grass. The cattle thrived, the ranch prospered, and life settled into a comfortable rhythm. It was in late April that Fiona came to Thomas with news that made his heart soar. "I am with child," she said simply, her face radiant with joy. Thomas let out a whoop of delight and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to stop. "A baby," he said wonderingly, setting her down and placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" she asked, though she must have seen the answer in his face. Happy does not begin to describe it. I am overjoyed. I am blessed beyond measure. He kissed her softly. "Thank you, Fiona. Thank you for giving me this gift, for giving me a family again." "We made this baby together," she reminded him, smiling. "You have given me just as much." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Fiona bloomed with health, her already beautiful face taking on an ethereal glow. She continued her work for as long as she could, though Thomas and Charles both worried and fussed over her, trying to make her rest. The children were ecstatic at the prospect of a new baby, Emily and Margaret both declaring they would help take care of it, and Samuel looking proud and protective. As Fiona's belly grew, Thomas found himself overcome with emotion at odd moments. He would be mending a fence or herding cattle, and suddenly, the reality of impending fatherhood would hit him, and he would have to stop and breathe through the mixture of joy and fear. He had been a father before, had loved his daughter with all his heart, and losing her had nearly destroyed him. The thought of going through that again, of losing another child, was almost paralyzing. Fiona, with her usual insight, sensed his fear. One evening, as they sat together on their porch, her hand resting on her swollen belly, she said gently, "You are afraid." "Yes," Thomas admitted, no point in lying to her. "You are afraid of losing this baby the way you lost Sarah." "Yes." "Thomas, look at me." She waited until he met her eyes. "I cannot promise you that nothing bad will ever happen. Life is uncertain and full of sorrow as well as joy, but I can promise you that whatever comes, we will face it together. You are not alone in this. You have me and you have our love, and that is stronger than any fear." "What if I am not strong enough?" The words came out raw, the deepest fear he had been holding. "What if something happens and I fall apart again? Then I will hold you together," Fiona said simply. "The same way you have held me together when I needed it. That is what marriage is, Thomas. We take turns being strong for each other." He pulled her close as her belly would allow, and held her, drawing strength from her certainty. She was right. Whatever came, they would face it together. Fiona went into labor on a hot July evening, just as the sun was setting. Thomas was in the barn when Charles's oldest daughter, who had been visiting, came running to tell him. He dropped everything and raced to the cabin, his heart pounding with excitement and terror. The local midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Patterson, was already there along with Charles's sister, who had experience with childbirth. They shooed Thomas out of the bedroom, telling him to wait, but he could not bear to be far from Fiona. He paced the main room of the cabin, flinching every time he heard her cry out, praying desperately for her safety and the baby's. The labor lasted through the night and into the next morning, long hours during which Thomas aged years. Charles came to sit with him, offering silent support, and Samuel appeared at dawn with food that Thomas could not eat. Finally, just as the sun was fully up and painting the prairie gold. Thomas heard the thin, reedy cry of a newborn baby. His knees went weak with relief and he sank into a chair, his hands shaking. Mrs. Patterson emerged from the bedroom, her face tired but smiling. "Congratulations, Mr. Vance. You have a son, a big, healthy boy." "And Fiona?" Thomas asked urgently, tired but well. "She did beautifully." "You can go in now." Thomas entered the bedroom on shaking legs. Fiona lay in the bed, her hair damp with sweat, her face pale but glowing with happiness. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket, and when Thomas approached, she pulled back the fabric to reveal the red, wrinkled face of his son. "Meet Theodore Charles Vance," Fiona said softly, "though I think we should call him Theo." Thomas knelt beside the bed, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his wife and child. "He is perfect. You are perfect. Thank you, Fiona, thank you. Do you want to hold him?" Thomas had not held a baby since Sarah died, had not allowed himself to even be near infants for fear of the memories they would bring. But when Fiona placed Theo in his arms, the weight of his son, the warmth and reality of him, did not bring pain. It brought healing. "Hello, Theo," Thomas whispered, touching the soft cheek with one finger. "I am your papa, and I am going to love you and protect you all the days of my life." The baby made a small snuffling sound and settled more deeply into sleep. Thomas looked at Fiona and saw his own wonder and joy reflected in her eyes. "We made this," he said in awe, "this perfect little person." "We did," Fiona agreed, "and we are going to raise him to be good and kind and strong just like his father. And generous and brave and compassionate, just like his mother." They sat together, the three of them, as the morning sun filled the room with golden light, and Thomas felt a profound sense of peace. He had been given a second chance at family, at love, at fatherhood, and he was determined to cherish every moment. The years that followed were full and rich. Theo grew from infant to toddler to boy, a sturdy child with his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair. He was curious and adventurous, always underfoot, always asking questions, and Thomas delighted in every stage of his development. When Theo was 2, Fiona gave birth to a daughter they named Victoria Fern Vance, a delicate child with blonde curls and a sweet disposition. And 2 years after that, another son arrived, James Peter Vance, named for Fiona's father and brother. The cabin that had seemed so spacious when it was just the two of them became cramped and chaotic with 3 children, so Thomas built an addition, more rooms to accommodate their growing family. Charles's children continued to be a large part of their lives. Samuel grew into a responsible young man who worked the silver spur alongside his father, but he still came to Thomas for advice and treated him with the respect due a second father. Margaret and Emily spent countless hours at the Vance cabin, playing with the younger children and helping Fiona with household tasks. When Margaret turned 18, she married one of the ranch hands, a good man who had been courting her for years, and the wedding was a joyous affair that brought the whole community together. Through it all, Thomas and Fiona's love only deepened. They had their challenges, of course. There were lean years when the cattle prices dropped and money was tight. There were illnesses and injuries, the normal trials of raising children. There were moments of frustration and exhaustion, times when they snapped at each other over small things. But underlying it all was the bedrock of their commitment, the knowledge that they were partners in every sense of the word. Thomas never forgot the day he had seen Fiona give her last coin to a beggar. It had been the turning point of his life, the moment when everything changed. He had been searching for something without even knowing what it was, and in that single act of generosity he had found it. Heart, kindness, the quality that made life worth living. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Thomas took Fiona back to Dallas, just the two of them, leaving the children with Charles for the day. They walked down Commerce Street, past the Mercantile where the beggar had sat all those years ago. The old man was gone now, had died peacefully in a boarding house several years back, but Thomas remembered him with gratitude. "You know," Thomas said as they walked, "if you had not given that coin to that beggar, if you had kept it for yourself, we might never have met." "Oh, I think we would have found each other somehow," Fiona said, squeezing his hand. "Some things are meant to be. Maybe so, but I am grateful it happened the way it did. I am grateful I got to see your true nature right from the start. And I am grateful you were there to see it and to help me when I needed it most." She stopped and turned to face him, her face still as beautiful to him as it had been that first day. "You gave me a home, Thomas, a family, a life beyond anything I had dared to hope for." "You gave me the same," Thomas said, pulling her close. "You gave me back my heart." They kissed there on the street, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. Around them, Dallas bustled and grew, changing from a frontier town to a thriving city, but Thomas and Fiona remained constant, their love a steady anchor in a changing world. As the years passed, their children grew. Theo became a tall, strong young man with a gift for working with horses. He took over much of the horse-breaking duties on the Silver Spur, earning the respect of the older ranch hands. Victoria grew into a beautiful young woman with her mother's generous spirit, always the first to help a neighbor in need. James, the youngest, showed an aptitude for learning and declared his intention to become a doctor, a dream that both Thomas and Fiona supported wholeheartedly. When Theo turned 22, he fell in love with a girl from a neighboring ranch, a spirited young woman named Catherine, who could ride and rope as well as any man. Thomas and Fiona gave their blessing, and the wedding was held at the Silver Spur, a grand affair that brought together friends and family from miles around. As Thomas walked Theo up to stand beside his bride, he thought about his own father, long dead now, and wished he could have lived to see this moment. After the ceremony, as the dancing and celebration continued, Thomas and Fiona slipped away to the creek where he had proposed all those years ago. The spot had become special to them, a place they returned to whenever they needed to remember what was important. "Our son is married," Fiona said, leaning against Thomas's shoulder. "When did we get so old?" "We are not old," Thomas protested, though his hair was now more gray than dark and his joints ached on cold mornings. "We are seasoned." Fiona laughed, the sound still as bright as it had been when she was 23. "Seasoned, I like that." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Thomas, do you ever regret it? The life we have lived?" "Not for a single moment," Thomas said firmly. "Every day with you has been a gift, Fiona. Even the hard days, the painful days, I would not trade them because they were with you." "I feel the same way." She turned to look at him, her green eyes still clear and bright. "You know what I think about sometimes? That beggar on the street. I wonder if he ever knew what came of that coin I gave him." "I think he knew," Thomas said. "I think he saw it in your face, the kind of person you were. And maybe, in his own way, he was grateful. I hope so, because that coin bought me everything. It bought me you." They sat together as the sun set, and the sounds of the celebration drifted to them on the evening breeze. Two people who had found each other through an act of kindness and built a lifetime of love. More years passed, and the Vance family continued to grow. Theo and Catherine had 3 children of their own, filling Thomas and Fiona's cabin with the laughter and chaos of grandchildren. Victoria married a schoolteacher and moved to Austin, where she opened a school for poor children, carrying on her mother's legacy of generosity. James went east to medical school and returned to Dallas to open a practice, becoming one of the most respected doctors in the region. Charles grew old and eventually passed on, leaving the silver spur to Samuel, who ran it with the same dedication and integrity his father had shown. Margaret and Emily both had families of their own, but they remained close to Thomas and Fiona, still treating them as the parents who had stepped in when their mother died. As Thomas entered his 60s, he began to slow down, his body no longer able to handle the physical demands of ranch work. He turned over most of the day-to-day operations to Theo and spent his time teaching his grandchildren to ride and rope, passing on the skills and knowledge he had accumulated over a lifetime. Fiona, too, had aged, her hair now silver, her face lined, but to Thomas, she was still the most beautiful woman in the world. They celebrated their 30th anniversary surrounded by children and grandchildren, a house full of love and laughter. That night, after everyone had gone home and they were alone in the cabin that had been their home for so long, Thomas took Fiona's hand and led her out to the porch. "Remember when this was just an empty piece of land?" he asked, looking out at the buildings and fences, the corrals and gardens they had built over the years. "I remember," Fiona said. "You built this cabin with your own 2 hands, built it for me. I would build it again. I would build 100 cabins if it meant spending my life with you." "Oh, Thomas." She leaned her head on his shoulder and they stood like that, 2 people who had weathered 3 decades together, who had faced joy and sorrow, triumph and hardship, and come through it all with their love intact. "You know what I realized today?" Fiona asked softly. "We have been married 30 years. 30 years that started because I gave away my last coin." "Best investment you ever made," Thomas said, and she laughed. "The very best." They stood together under the stars, holding hands as they had on their first evening together, and Thomas felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had been given so much more than he deserved, more than he had ever dared to hope for. A woman who loved him, children who honored him, a life filled with purpose and meaning. And it had all started because a generous woman had given her last coin to a stranger in need. As the years continued to pass, Thomas and Fiona began to think about their legacy, what they would leave behind when they were gone. They had the ranch, of course, and their children and grandchildren. But Fiona wanted something more, something that would reflect the values they had tried to live by. "I want to start a fund," she told Thomas one evening. "A fund to help people who are struggling the way I was struggling when I came to Dallas, people who need a second chance." "That is a wonderful idea," Thomas said. "How do we go about it?" They worked with James, who had connections in Austin, to establish the Vance Charitable Fund. It started small, with money they had saved over the years, but as word spread, others contributed. Charles's children donated in memory of their father. Former ranch hands who had prospered sent money. Even some of the merchants in Dallas, who remembered the young woman who had given her last coin to a beggar, added to the fund. The money was used to help people in need, paying for medical care, providing seed money for new businesses, helping families in crisis. Fiona insisted on being involved in every decision, interviewing applicants and determining who would benefit most. She approached it with the same generous spirit she had shown all her life, looking for people with heart, people who would use the help wisely. Thomas watched with pride as his wife made a difference in dozens of lives, as the fund grew and expanded beyond anything they had initially imagined. It was fitting, he thought, that the woman who had once given away her last coin now had the resources to help on a much larger scale. On a warm spring day in 1912, 34 years after that fateful meeting in Dallas, Thomas woke to find Fiona still sleeping beside him, her face peaceful in the morning light. He studied her, this woman who had been his partner, his love, his best friend for more than 3 decades. Her hair was white now, her face deeply lined, but to him she was as beautiful as she had been at 23. She stirred and opened her eyes, smiling when she saw him watching her. "Good morning, husband. Good morning, wife." He kissed her softly. "How are you feeling?" "Old," she said with a laugh. "But blessed. So very blessed." They rose and went about their morning routine, moving slowly but comfortably. Their children and grandchildren were coming for Sunday dinner, as they did every week, and Fiona wanted to make sure everything was ready. As they worked together in the kitchen, Thomas found himself thinking about the journey they had taken together. From that chance meeting in Dallas to this moment, preparing for a family dinner in their old age, it had been a remarkable life. Not perfect, not without pain or struggle, but full of love and meaning. "What are you thinking about?" Fiona asked, catching him staring. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Thomas said honestly. About how one moment, one decision to follow a woman who gave away her last coin changed everything. "It was not luck," Fiona said, coming to stand beside him. "It was choice. You chose to help me, I chose to trust you. We chose to love each other every day, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard." "You are right," Thomas said, pulling her into his arms. "And I would make the same choice every single time." Their children and grandchildren arrived in a flurry of noise and activity. Theo and Catherine with their 3 children, now teenagers themselves. Victoria and her husband with their 2 daughters. James with his wife and their young son. Samuel and his family. Margaret and Emily and their broods. The house was filled to bursting, chaos and laughter echoing off the walls. As Thomas sat at the head of the table, Fiona at his side, surrounded by the family they had built together, he felt a sense of completion. This was what life was about, he thought. Not money or status or achievements, though those had their place. It was about love, about connection, about caring for others and being cared for in return. After dinner, as the sun began to set and the family gathered on the porch, Thomas stood and raised his hand for attention. The chatter died down, all eyes turning to him. "I want to say something," Thomas began, his voice still strong despite his years. "Your grandmother and I have been blessed beyond measure. We have had a good life together, full of love and joy and purpose. But it all started with a single act of kindness, when Fiona gave her last coin to a man in need." He looked around at the gathered faces, at children and grandchildren who had heard this story before but never tired of it. "That act of generosity showed me who Fiona truly was. It showed me she had the heart I had been searching for all my life. And I want all of you to remember that as you go forward. Kindness matters. Generosity matters. Caring for those in need matters. Those are the things that make life worth living, the things that create connections and build families and change the world, one person at a time." "Hear, hear," Theo called out, and the others echoed him. Fiona stood and took Thomas's hand, her eyes shining with tears. "What your grandfather is trying to say in his long-winded way is that love is the most important thing. Love for each other, love for your neighbors, love for strangers who need help. Everything else flows from that. Everything else flows from that," Thomas repeated, pulling her close. "And I have been blessed to spend my life with a woman who understands that better than anyone I have ever known." The family applauded, and the grandchildren rushed forward to hug them both. As Thomas held his wife and felt the love of his family surrounding him, he thought about the journey they had taken. From a dusty street in Dallas to this moment, it had been an incredible ride. And it had all started because a generous woman had given her last coin to a beggar, and a lonely cowboy had been there to see it. Thomas and Fiona lived many more years together, watching their grandchildren grow and begin to have families of their own. The Vance Charitable Fund continued to expand, helping hundreds of people over the years, creating a legacy of generosity that would outlast them both. When Thomas was 78 years old, he fell ill with pneumonia. Despite James's best efforts, despite Fiona's devoted nursing, his body was simply too worn out to fight. He died on a quiet autumn evening, surrounded by his family, holding Fiona's hand. His last words were for her. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything, for being you, for giving me a life worth living." "I love you," Fiona said through her tears. "I will always love you, and I love you, my generous, beautiful Fiona, the woman with the heart I had been searching for." Then he closed his eyes and was gone, peaceful and ready, having lived a full and meaningful life. Fiona mourned him deeply but not hopelessly. She knew they would be together again someday. In the meantime, she had work to do, grandchildren to love, and the charitable fund to manage. She lived another 5 years, active and engaged until the very end. And when she passed away in her sleep at the age of 82, the entire community came together to mourn a woman who had touched countless lives with her kindness. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the Silver Spur Ranch, under a spreading oak tree that Thomas had planted when they first built their cabin. Their graves were marked with simple headstones that bore their names and a single inscription that captured the essence of their relationship. 2 hearts, 1 love, a lifetime of generosity. The Vance Charitable Fund continued for generations, managed first by their children and then by their grandchildren and great-grandchildren. It became one of the most respected charitable organizations in Texas, helping thousands of people over the decades, always guided by the principle that had started it all: that kindness matters, that generosity is never wasted, and that one small act of compassion can change everything. And in Dallas, on Commerce Street near where a mercantile once stood, a bronze plaque was installed by the city in honor of Fiona and Thomas Vance. It read, "In memory of Fiona and Thomas Vance, who taught us that true wealth is measured not in money but in the lives we touch and the love we share." It all began with a single coin given in kindness. Their story became part of the local legend, told and retold over the years, a reminder that the greatest love stories often start with the simplest acts of humanity. That a cowboy searching for something he could not name found it in a woman generous enough to give her last coin to a stranger. That 2 people from different worlds could build a life together based on shared values and genuine love. That kindness, compassion, and generosity never go out of style and never lose their power to transform lives. And so the legacy of Thomas and Fiona Vance lived on, not in grand monuments or impressive achievements, but in the countless lives they had touched, the family they had raised, and the example they had set. They had shown that the best things in life come not from taking but from giving, not from hoarding but from sharing, not from closing your heart but from opening it wide. All because a cowboy watched a woman give her last coin to a beggar and recognized in that moment that she had the heart he had been searching for all his life. And all because a generous woman chose to trust a stranger who offered to help her when she had nothing left. Together, they had built something beautiful, something lasting, something that would echo through generations. Their love story was complete, a tale of 2 people who found each other against all odds and chose every day to honor and cherish what they had built together. From that first meeting in Dallas in 1878 to their final years together in the 20th century, they had lived fully, loved deeply, and left the world better than they found it. And in the end, what more could anyone ask for than that?